What about in smaller individuals?
Yeah, so that
Where
That
calories
is the question.
like calories are
yeah,
like really uber low, and it's like, okay, if
yeah.
you take them any
I
lower,
think
they're probably gonna, even though you have a step count target there, it's like, man, it's like, how people cheat on their diet. Like,
Mhm.
I think I must cheat on my steps today
Yeah,
because I don't feel
yeah,
like moving.
exactly. So I think, anybody who's prepped smaller athletes, lighter athletes, it does seem to be less predictable oftentimes because of that. And, to your point with your athlete where you were adding, increasing the cardio sessions up to 6 times a week and nothing budged, like the NEAT definitely contributed there. But
Yeah.
there's also the element, past a point, like adding steps, you're not going to get the same return. The more calorically restricted, like the lower your energy availability, the less additional steps are going to really help, and that's like the idea of like the constrained energy model. And to kind of plug Dr. Mike Israetel with RP, he recently had Eric Trexler on to talk about this, and I would encourage people to check that out. But the idea is, if you can only increase physical activity so much to the point where additional physical activity isn't going to predictably and reliably increase your total daily energy expenditure as much as you'd think. And a lot of that is, reductions in NEAT, but also, reductions in, basal aspects in terms of like hormone production, things like that. So it's, in that makes it especially hard with lighter individuals because the temptation is to really lean into cardio, but that can also backfire after a while. And so I think the solution to this, or at least the way I approach it, is just really understand like an adequate timeline where you can keep energy availability as high as you can get away with is going to mitigate a lot of that. And so that's it's sort of the only way to kind of work around that unfortunate reality that lighter individuals have it a little bit harder.
And that's exactly why, especially with smaller individuals, and really, I mean, most of the time we're talking about females, right? But there are males that are small. We've had males compete at 105, 100, even less than 100 pounds, right? So it's not just relegated to females. We're just talking smaller humans.
Yeah.
And in those humans, I want really, if I can, to get their cardiovascular expenditure through aerobic exercise down to nothing if I can. Because, and this is where, man, with the step count and these little devices that count steps, I almost felt like that was a cheat code at some point. It seemed so reliable that if you took somebody that was very inactive and they got on average 4,000 steps a day, if you just doubled it to 8,000 steps a day, it would move the needle. But yeah, getting back to those smaller athletes, if I can get away with having them doing zero cardiovascular training through aerobic training, we can do exactly what I just talked about. If they're an active person, we just get their steps up and we get the needle moving. But then you're right, Ryan, there comes a certain point, and it's interesting that you talk about that discussion with Mike and Eric, because I've noticed that, it's like, and it seems, there's probably not like a magic threshold, but at least what I've noticed, when you get above 12,000 steps a day to where it's like 84,000 steps a week, there is no change. Nothing happens after that. It's like that seems to be the point when there's no return, right?
Yeah.
But, and why this is, I don't really know. Well, I mean, I kind of have a feeling, but I don't have evidence for it. But if you can just take that athlete that is doing zero cardiovascular exercise through aerobic training, maintain their steps, and now have some of those steps turn into what is cardiovascular training through aerobic training, it starts to move the needle. So if you're at kind of what I consider to be the max, 12,000 steps, and they're doing zero aerobic training, right? Just tell them, a lot of times I'll just start with just 2 sessions. I want 2 sessions after your weight training, 5 to 10 minutes. That will usually get the needle moving. And I guess it's just because maybe the increased heart rate burns more calories, because of the sustained heart rate for 5 to 10 minutes. I don't really know, but it seems like it works pretty darn well with those individuals who are basically under 120 pounds, right? To get that needle moving without having to drop their calories every freaking day to 900, 850
Well, I mean, if you
or
go
whatever.
let's say you go from 10,000 steps up to 15, like, is it the same pace? Because
Well,
at that point, you figure they're plateaued, right? Like you're factoring, okay, you're making the change because they're plateaued. So fatigue probably is going to go up from 10,000 to 15,000 steps. So am I going to walk faster or slower or the same pace?
or
Like
is it
some
just giving
people
more
might,
trips to the remote control?
like some people might walk even slower, you know. So, or some people get on a walking treadmill and they're working while they're on the walking treadmill. And I've seen this. I've seen people walk like, what are you doing? It's not a walk. It's just like a tick, tick, tick. It's like barely moving. So your step count's 25,000. But if you were to double that pace, well, now you're at 12,000 steps and you're burning more calories in less time. And the thing about that increasing to a high step count is usually the pushback you'll get is it's a time suck. Because if you're talking 12,000 steps, like most people are going to be allocating an hour to an hour and a half a day of just walking.
It does become a challenge. Yeah.
So that's a stressor in itself. So it's like, okay, even if it is a small individual, it's like, is 100 calories less? Is that going to probably work out better? Or is it like cranking their steps way up? And I think it's just a case by case. It could be the same person, but it could just be context dependent on where they're at.
Yeah, and their
in the
rate
process.
you might have to pick a middle ground that's sustainable and accept a slower rate of loss, and so that's why the timeline becomes even more important. But yeah, anecdotally, and interesting to hear you say kind of 12K, Brad, because it does seem like once you get north of that, it's pretty unreliable in terms of additional benefit. And I've always wondered, okay, is this like the constrained energy model that I talked about? Is this that at work, or is it the fact that usually at that point people are pretty shredded already? What we're digging through the last bit of fat loss, and is it more so just water retention from all the steps and walking and stress, and that's often there's more volatility and weigh-ins at that stage of prep anyway. So, but it's probably a combination of both, honestly. And, but it is tricky when you have, limited time and you have to create the deficit somehow. Like how do you go about doing that? And in those situations, sometimes pulling back on food is going to be the way to go, but it can still, there's still going to be reductions and, it's not going to resolve all of the issue. Like there's still going to be compensatory aspects of that too. So, I think lighter individuals, they just have it harder in that regard.
Yeah, for sure.
So all the years you guys have been coaching since tracking steps, what's the highest you've seen someone's step count?
I saw I had someone the other
for an
day.
athlete,
purposeful or not purposeful, either way. Like
I don't think
and what's the context around that?
Okay. I don't think I've purposely gone above 15. And even that felt a little bit like, okay, I feel like I shouldn't have to be doing this.
Yeah.
And it didn't pan out the way I had expected, really, to be honest. But it was, near the end of a prep, getting the last bit off. But I had somebody report 35,000 the other day they were not intentionally trying to get as many as they could, but
just
they
a
were
day, or is it like an entire week?
Just a day, just a day. They were just on their feet all day. I forget what the context of the situation was, but like some of it was deliberate, but it was also just a physically very active day outside of exercising. But I think the most I've ever recorded since, having a Fitbit was like 25. And that was when we went to Universal Studios with the family. My feet hurt. So it was...
Same was my anniversary in San Francisco. We walked all around San Francisco. My step count was like 24,000 that day. And I was like, oh my gosh. The next day I was so just wrecked. Yeah. But my prep, this last one, I averaged anywhere between 8 to 12. That was kind of like 12 was, I went over that a couple times, but not like for like weeks on straight. It was just like a couple days here and there. But for the most part in 2019, there was stints where I was like 15 to 18,000 because my food level was low. And from an adherence perspective, I know if I dip too low, I'm going to binge. Yeah. So I just chose to dig through steps and activity, but that required a time suck because it was literally an hour of walking in the morning and then another 45 minutes in the afternoon because during the day I'm pretty sedentary. Now, as far as programming other people, I usually cap things at 15. Like I try not to get anybody higher than that. And it's more so it's like most of the time it's going to be anywhere between 6 to 12, like you were saying, Brad. Like for you were 10K at the last stretch. I have someone right now who's doing 20 to 25,000 steps a day. And this is because of a personality. They're very active. They're very like high energy people, even prepping high energy. This is our third prep together. The first prep, the first two were more like I was trying to be more conservative with step count. Because it was getting like neighborhood of 15K. I'm like, this is too much. I'm like, hey, let's not go over this. And it was almost a stressor for them to stay under 15K. And eventually I learned their personality more and more. And it was actually a stressor for me to try to keep them down. So I just allowed them to go higher. So now 20 to 25K is almost like their normal baseline.
Jeez.
But like you said, so that's their baseline. But I know better than to say, okay, we're going to do 30,000 steps now. If
or just tell them to double it or whatever. Yeah.
It's if we need a little extra to get some more fat loss, I used to say, hey, let's make some of that like riding the bike or something, like get a little more expenditure for that activity, or we're going to drop calories down. And the calories has been the most predictable way to get the fat loss that we're seeing.
Yeah, because it all comes down to calories most of the time. That is the most predictable way to get the needle moving is the intake. I got to back up though just a little bit because me being the competitive guy that I am, I got you guys both beat on steps. During Snowpocalypse March, when we had no power for 4 days, and I had to clear my driveway of snow, and then I had to go do my in-laws' driveway and clear theirs of snow, and I had to do that 2 consecutive days in a row. I had 39,354 on March 2nd. I had 34,755 on March 3rd. And I don't say that to brag because, I mean, maybe a little bit, I should say, forgive me, Lord. Anyway, I kind of think in terms of more weekly expenditure, right? Because I mentioned before, like 84,000 a week is kind of like my cutoff. I don't like to get above that, which is about 12,000 steps a day. Because what I do a lot of times is I do basically prescribe just that. I'll just say, okay, I really don't really care too much. I do want you to get at least probably 8,000 steps in a day, but more so our goal, remember Jeff, my program was 1,700 and 70,000 steps, right? 1,700 calories a day, 70,000 steps a week. And I'll just tell people, okay, you know what? If it's summertime, I just want you getting out, mowing the lawn, sweeping the driveway, yard work once a week. And you know what happens? That one day they end up getting between 18 and 22,000 steps. And then the rest of it, they can just kind of go through life without it being such a time suck. And they end up meeting the 70,000, 80, 75,000, whatever. So like with you, Jeff, I say, okay, Jeff, you know what? One day I want you to go outside and I want you to wash your truck. I want you to wash this slingshot.
It's too hot, Brad. It's 100 degrees outside. No,
I figure it out. But that seems to work pretty well when I'm thinking, because that's a lot of times I'm a big picture thinker anyway. I think in terms of weeks and months and how can we make this kind of like more like an average, and then it's not, quite such a time suck.
I feel more confident in giving something like that to people who I know are very on top of it. Like they have a good daily routine, and because I can see the flip side of that, where someone who's like, maybe they're a little too loose and they're like, well, it's Wednesday. I still have the rest of the week
Yeah, it
to
does
make up
happen.
for it. And then at the end, you're like, well, shit, now we're like 40,000 steps behind.